Today's mini lecture is on the Assyrian Empire. Now, we're only going to talk about the Middle and Neo-Assyrian Empire, Neo meaning new. So we're going to talk about the Middle and New Assyrian Empire. There is such a thing as the Old Assyrian Empire. In 1900 BCE, Ashur, the capital of Assyria, was founded, and this is kind of northwest of Babylon. This was the capital of the Old Assyrian Empire, but from about 1680 to 1400 BCE, the Old Assyrian Empire was occupied by foreign powers. The Hittites and the Mitanni were two of the occupying powers, so they weren't an independent kingdom for much of that time. So we're just going to kind of skip over the Old Empire period, and we're going to focus on Middle and Neo-Assyrian Empire, which is when Assyria had achieved and kept their independence. So in 1392 BCE, Assyria established its independence, and this is called the Middle Assyrian Empire. Here you can see a map of empires in the Near East, or Middle East, same thing. In the 14th century BCE, so right around the time that Middle Assyria gained independence. And you can see that Assyria is modestly sized at first. It's over in the top right corner in yellow, compared to other empires that were active and developing at the time. So during the first few years of its established independence, Assyria conquered the Hittites and the Mitanni. Eventually, it would come to conquer parts of Egypt and the rest of Mesopotamia and basically all of the eastern Mediterranean coast. So all of these areas that you see as independent civilizations came to be under the Assyrian Empire at one point or another, mostly towards the later times, the later periods of the empire, and we'll get to that soon. During the Middle Assyrian Empire, something that the Assyrians are really known for is their deportation scheme. So Emperor Adad-nirari I, so Adad-nirari I, he wanted to prevent uprisings by the Anatolian peoples that they were in the midst of conquering. And his solution was to deport non-Assyrians and kind of install ethnic Assyrians in their place. So deportees, they weren't just kind of thrown out of the empire. This is not like instances of ethnic cleansing or mass deportations that we know about today, like in Rwanda or when the Holocaust. It wasn't like that. Deportees were chosen depending on their skills, and they were sent to regions where the emperor could benefit from the application of the skills for the empire. So if somebody was good at weaving textiles, they were sent to a part of the empire where there was a textile industry. Or if somebody was really good at had really good negotiating skills, then they and their family were sent to an area where the Assyrians needed them to conduct diplomacy. So in some ways it was kind of an honor to be deported, but it was still, it's still hard times for people being sort of sent away. Here is a slide of, it's a picture of the walled city of Nineveh, which is one of the most important cities in the Assyrian Empire. And I just included it because I wanted you to see the scale of these city walls, and just you can kind of imagine the level of skill and just the amount of labor that it would take to build something like this 2,000, 3,000 years ago. Adad-nirari I, who had sort of started those deportation schemes, he was a particularly successful Assyrian ruler in this older period. He built many city walls, he dug canals, he restored a bunch of temples to be used by the Assyrian devotees. He was a pretty important guy. Now his grandson is Tukulti-Ninurta I. I know these names are just intense. And so his grandson and his son kind of continued to conquer the ethnic peoples around them and to still use this deportation scheme. Here you can see a depiction of an Assyrian scribe. This was probably carved into a stela or stelae. It's the kind of the same thing that Hammurabi hung up around Babylon when he wanted the inscriptions of his laws to be posted all over the place. They were kind of posted around on these stelae, which are just giant stones that are carved with information. So this is a carving of an Assyrian scribe, which is basically someone who knows how to write. Tukulti-Ninurta I, remember this is Adad-nirari's grandson, he perfected the deportation scheme that his grandfather had started, and he sent scribes and scholars to Assyrian cities where they could use their writing skills and their knowledge in the bureaucratic requirements of empire. So as the empire grew, they have more records that they need to keep, what taxes are they collecting, what trade are they conducting, these things all need to be recorded. And Tukulti-Ninurta I realized that, and so he sent scribes and scholars to the areas where the Assyrian bureaucracy was growing. And here is a depiction of Tukulti-Ninurta I, and that's his spelling of his name in case you're curious. He was a harsh military man. He put down revolts, of which there were many, and he put them down without mercy. I mean, he just killed anyone he could and enslaved enemy populations so that they would be put to service for the empire. And this is a theme throughout the centuries for them. The Assyrians were just known for their harsh military tactics. And this is sort of an interesting fact. Tukulti-Ninurta I was assassinated by one of his sons. This is also something that's really common. It happened a lot in Egypt. Many sons assassinated their fathers so that they could take over the empire. So now we're done with the Middle Assyrian Empire, and we're going to move on to the most recent iteration of the Assyrian Empire, sometimes known as the Neo-Assyrian Empire. This lasted from 911 BCE to 612 BCE, so we're talking much more recent. And this is the empire that most people think of when they mention Assyria or the Assyrian Empire. It's known for its interactions with the 12 tribes of Israel in the Bible, and it's also known for its rapid expansion. You can see here that the Neo-Assyrian Empire, by this period, the Assyrians had taken over almost all of that area that had belonged to other cultures in the map that I showed you in the beginning of the mini lecture. So it expanded rapidly, and it was known because of its references in the Bible, and at the time it was known just from all of the expansion for its cruelty. So these were cutthroat, vindictive regimes, and it had an incredibly successful military. Here you can see it's a carving of a military campaign of the Assyrians. They were a very militaristic society. All other ancient militaries aspired to be like the Neo-Assyrian armies. They were especially good at siege warfare, and there's an image in a blurb about an Assyrian siege for you to check out in the module. In truth, their cruelty and militarism, it's not really all that different from many of the other ancient regimes. Many other ancient regimes, the Hittites, for example, were very violent, militaristic regimes. This was really common in the ancient world. I think the reason the Assyrians stand out to historians and to archaeologists so much is because their cruelty is sort of hammered home so often in the Bible. Lastly, I want to mention Adad-nirari II. So this is the third emperor that I'm mentioning. He conquered Babylon, and this is for the second time in the history of the empire. But at the time, he decided that instead of raping and pillaging the city and enslaving the Babylonians, he decided to make peace with the king of Babylon, the current king of Babylon, and they married their children to each other, and this initiated a period of peace. So Adad-nirari II did something different that than most Assyrian emperors had done up until this point, and that is use diplomacy instead of violence to negotiate what they wanted. And even though non-Assyrians were still being deported with that deportation system that I mentioned earlier, they were being deported out of the Assyrian heartland. All peoples under the Assyrian Empire, whether they were in the heartland or whether they were deportees sent to the far-flung edges of the empire, they all had equal rights with ethnic Assyrians. So this is sort of interesting, and this is generally the norm for ancient empires as well. So that's all I have for you on the Assyrians, short and sweet. Please move on to the rest of the module and look at that siege image that I mentioned to you earlier.